Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. Before we get started, I want to get a quick disclaimer out of the way. While I do work for the Wheeling and Lake Erie Railway Company, this channel is not affiliated with them in any way. My job is to fix locomotives, not to represent the company publicly. For more information, you can see my channel description. So, okay? Okay. Alright, so, getting straight into it. What is an SD40-2? Well, to start, I'm actually going to ignore the -2 on the end and tell you what an SD40 is. An SD40 is a 3,000 horsepower, 6-axle, diesel-electric road switcher built by the Locomotive division of the General Motors Corporation, aka EMD. So what does all that mess mean? Well, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by telling you what horsepower and 6 axles mean, but what does diesel electric mean? Well, diesel electric means that it uses a diesel engine to produce electrical power that turns the traction motors which actually move the thing down the rail. What about road switcher? A road switcher is a locomotive that is designed for both mainline and switching service. The main way you can spot a road switcher is with a cab, specifically a nose or short hood that does not cover the full width of the car body, allowing better visibility when approaching something from the short hood end. Now, that's an SD40. What about the -2 on the end? Well, what defines a -2 is two main things. They're both electrical related. A -2 has electrical circuits that are arranged in modules that are designed to be replaced wholesale. So if you have a module that's bad, you pull the module out, put a new module in. It shouldn't require any adjustment, and that locomotive should be good to go. The other thing that defines a -2 is motorized transfer switches rather than magnetic transfer switches. These motorized transfer switches have the major advantage of having one motor to turn all the transfer switches whichever way. You're not relying on several magnetic coils that are kind of prone to failure. Now, breaking it down even further within -2s, there are what I like to call true -2s and converted -2s. A true -2 has an SD40-2 car body and HTC truck assemblies underneath of it. A converted -2 has an SD40 car body, yes they are different, and has the old school flex coil truck assemblies underneath of it. Alright, so now that we've been over what a -2 is, now let's go through some of the major components you'll notice looking at the side of a -2. One thing that's convenient about our color scheme for this is you have this nice bright orange stripe that runs down the length of the locomotive. And that stripe is the top of the frame. Right on top of that is the running boards. Everything above the running boards is considered part of the superstructure, and everything below the running boards is considered part of the underframe. Starting with the underframe, some of the major components you're going to see are the front and rear couplers, front and rear drop steps with associated grab irons, the front and rear truck assemblies, and the front and rear jacking pads. Jacking pads are used to jack the car body up off of the truck so the truck assemblies can be removed. There's also the fuel tank and a main reservoir, which this side you're looking at the second main reservoir. And the main reservoirs also have associated blowdown filters, which are located right at the front of the fuel tank. One last component that's kind of hard to see in this shot is right on the very rear end of the tank. There is a retention tank, which takes anything that leaks out inside the car body and stores it so it doesn't get dumped between the rails. Now moving to above the running boards. The superstructure is divided into three main areas, those being the long hood, cab, and the short hood. Starting from the short hood end, we have the short hood itself, and it's hard to see in this shot, but there's a sand cap on the very front where you can fill the sandbox. There are also battery boxes on each side of the locomotive located here. There's also the brow, which has the front headlights usually, and number boards in it. Then there is the cab itself. I don't think I need to explain too much about that. Above the cab, you can see the radio antenna, and there's also an antenna for the head-end box that communicates with the marker on the end of the train. Directly behind the cab and the long hood, you have the inertia filters. These are a pre-filter for any air that goes through any of the central air system on the locomotive. Right behind that, on top, you can see the exhaust stack, and directly behind the exhaust stack, you have the dynamic brake hatch with the grids and the cooling fans on top of it. Not all locomotives are equipped with dynamic brakes, so if you have a locomotive that's not equipped with them, these fans and the hatch and the grids will all be missing, and the car body through this area will just be smooth. At the very back of the long hood, you can see the 3 cooling fans for the radiators and the radiator shutters on the side. And at the very end of the long hood, you have another sand cap with another box beneath it. And you also have the rear headlights and rear number boards, which are, again, kind of hard to see in this shot. Okay, so that's one side of the locomotive. Now let's jump to the other side. I've got a few things I want to mention over here. The first one, again, starting from the short hood, is the handbrake and the handbrake chain. So as you ratchet the handle, it pulls on this chain, which presses the brake shoes against the wheels. It's designed to keep the locomotive from rolling away if it's shut down and the air pressure leaks off. The next one is right here under the cab. In hindsight, I probably should have mentioned this on the other side because that's where most of the parts are. But under here, this is beneath the cab floor. We also sometimes call it the air door because it's where most of your air brake system components are located. The next 3 things are all kind of grouped together, and those 3 things are the bubble, the electrical cabinet air filters, and the traction motor air duct. These 3 components are all part of what's called a central air system. You can see there's another main reservoir located on this side of the locomotive, and this is actually your first main reservoir, and located right here towards the long hood end of it is the 150-pound safety valve. This is a valve that if for whatever reason an air compressor doesn't cut out and the pressure in the main reservoir gets higher than it's supposed to be, it'll pop open and blow the air out to bring the pressure back down to a safe level. The last 2 components that I want to mention while looking at this side of the locomotive are 2 components that I think fairly well demonstrate what I call the golden rule of working on these things, and that being they're all the same except they never are. And those 2 components are the horn and the warning bell. Both of these are powered by air on most locomotives of this age, and they are usually in the general places that you see them here, but like I said, they're all the same except when they aren't. Later in this video, I'll show you another one where the bell is not in this area, and if you look back through some of the pictures, you can see that the horns on a lot of the locomotives I've showed you are in different places. Alright, so that has us covered as far as the sides of the locomotive. Now let's look at one of the ends. We're going to use the front end here, but realistically they're both the same for the components I want to talk about. Starting at the running board, here in the center it's kind of hard to see. You can see the walkway extension or the walkway platform. So when 2 locomotives are coupled together in a consist, these can fold down or they can be permanently down, and it'll connect the 2 locomotives together so you can walk between them. You can also see the ditch lights or the auxiliary headlights. These are required on pretty much any newer locomotive. There are exceptions, but the vast majority of any locomotives you're going to see anymore are going to have ditch lights like this. You can also see the MU cable along with the MU cable receptacle and the dummy receptacle. The actual receptacle usually will have a red cap, and or the dummy will have the words dummy spray painted or stenciled onto it. The foolproof way to tell which is to open the thing up and see if there's pins in there. If there's pins in it, then it's the actual receptacle. The MU cable is used so that you can control all the locomotives in a consist from the lead engine in that consist. So when you hook them together and plug this cable in, whatever you do in the lead engine, the rest of them will follow suit. Continuing with the MU theme, you can see two sets of MU hoses on each side of the front end sheet here. These hoses are for the brake system. From the inside out, these hoses are the main reservoir hose, the actuating hose, and the independent equalizing hose. These three, again, have to do with the brake system, and we'll talk more about them when we get to actual air brakes. The last two things have to do with the train itself, and those are the coupler. You can see a much better view of it here, along with the knuckle, the part that moves in the center, and you can also see that it has two cut levers that can be used to operate the coupler. Now, most locomotives, again, they're all the same except when they aren't, most locomotives have a top-operated coupler assembly, meaning whenever you operate the cut lever, it lifts the lock out of the top of the coupler to open the knuckle. Some older locomotives and most freight cars, to be honest with you, have bottom-operated couplers, where when you lift the cut lever, it all happens from the bottom inside the coupler to open the knuckle. Below the coupler, you can see here the train line hose, or the brake pipe hose. And the brake pipe is kept closed by an angle cock. It's located here, except when it's not. And that train line is how the engineer controls the brakes on the train. And again, we'll talk more about that whenever we get to air brakes. But the train line is used anytime you are connected to cars or locomotives or whichever. You're going to be dealing with this train line. The MU hoses are used for when you want to arrange locomotives for multiple unit control. And one thing that maybe is worth mentioning is you can see here on the front end you have a snow plow. Not all locomotives are going to actually have one of these, but where I'm from, most of them do, because it actually does snow here. And even if it doesn't snow, it is nice because these have, I'm sure, saved many a train from a tree strike. So I think that actually covers my bases as far as all the components that I wanted to go over for now in this video. There's so much more we can go into, but we'll save most of that for later videos. Alright, now remember at the beginning of this video when I talked about true -2s and converted -2s and how to tell the difference between them? Well, let's brush up on that real quick. Every locomotive you looked at so far has been a true -2, and here's another one. This is also the one that I told you where the bell was in a weird place. Yeah, me and multiple other guys at work have spent an embarrassing amount of time wondering where the heck the bell was on this thing when it quits working, and it's because it's in a completely different spot from everything else. But I digress. So the main ways to tell a true -2 from a converted -2, as I mentioned, are the car body and the trucks. Starting with the trucks, you can see that this is an HTC truck assembly right here. The main thing that marks an HTC truck assembly out from a flex coil truck assembly is if you look closely, you can see that all three traction motors are facing the same way, And if you look between the bolster, which is right here, the part that actually mates with the locomotive, and the truck frame, a -2 truck or an HTC truck uses rubber spring pads. A flex coil truck, which we'll get to in a minute, does not have all the traction motors oriented the same way, and also does not have rubber spring pads between the bolster and the truck frame. It rather has big, huge coil springs between those. The next way you can spot a true -2 from a converted -2 is the car body doors underneath the radiator. Both a true -2 and a converted -2 are going to have 7 doors, but they're going to be arranged differently. On a true -2, the car body is slightly longer, and so there's more room inside the car body. So on a true -2, the first 2 doors under the radiators are going to open between the front of the engine and the equipment rack, which has your oil cooler, your oil filters, and a couple other things. The next 2 doors behind that are going to open to show your equipment rack. Depending on which side of the locomotive you're on, you're going to either be greeted with the load regulator and the AC cabinet, or the Michiana tank for your oil filters. Beyond that, you have another 2 doors that on a true -2 will open to reveal the air compressor. And the last door opens into the same section of the car body, it's just an extra door. That is the main way you can tell a true -2. Now let's take a look at a converted -2. Alright, now this is a picture of a converted -2. In the spirit of keeping things the same, we're going to go through the trucks first. So this is a picture of a flex coil truck assembly. You can see, if you look closely, that not all of the traction motors face the same way. 2 face one way, and the third one is turned around the other way. And also, if you look between the bolster and the truck frame, you can barely see the massive coil springs that these trucks use as a suspension system, hence the name flex coil. Also, there's a difference in the doors along the side of the car body. Again, the first one underneath the radiators, instead of being a double door like on a true -2, this one is only a single. Because the car body on an SD40 is slightly shorter, there's not as much room here, so they didn't opt to put in the second door. Behind that first door, you have a set of double doors, just like you did on a -2, and again, it opens into the equipment rack, so it's either the load regulator and the AC cabinet, or the Michiana tank, depending on which side of the locomotive you're on. Now behind that, on a converted -2, you have 2 sets of hinged doors. So these doors they have 2 sets of, I guess, clips, you could call them. You open one, it'll hinge out, and then you open the second, and that whole door opens. But it's hinged in the middle. One of those sets of doors opens into the air compressor, and the other one is, again, a spare one into the room behind the air compressor. Alright, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this video, so I'm going to do a brief overview here, and then I'm going to close with a bit of trivia. In this video, we went over what a -2 is, how to tell the difference between a true -2 and a converted -2, and we went over some major components. You also learned my golden rule of all locomotives are the same, except they never are. And the last thing I want to do here is close out with a bit of trivia. This locomotive is not really, but semi-famous, and I'm curious if any of you guys know why. If you know, leave it in the comments below, and I will be watching. And other than that, thank you guys for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.